Dealer Management System Report. Parts inventory management is a highly numbers-intensive business. A parts manager therefore must tap into the power of a comprehensive DMS to get the right information to improve management decisions. The industry today is dominated by the industry leaders ADP and Reynolds & Reynolds, which together hold about two-thirds of the Canadian market. I'll therefore concentrate my discussion on the range of reports they provide. As you'll see, although they may use different labels, the two systems are similar. We'll progress in the order of these 5 listed learning outcomes. First is recognize the prevailing patterns of DMS usage. There's been a survey done of dealer principals some years ago that looked at what system do you use, what functionality do you use, and to what extent do you employ that functionality in your daily management decisions, and that is quite enlightening. The second is employ monthly summary reports in appraising parts inventory conditions. ADP uses both a monthly summary analysis and an annual activity and benchmark trends report. Reynolds & Reynolds calls its regular or main monthly report the monthly analysis summary. 3. Examine key trends that identify latent inventory management problems. Both will base those on the KPIs, or the key performance indicators, we reviewed in chapters 3 and 4, the main ones that really tell us about advanced inventory management. 4. Select available detailed reports to assist in parts inventory troubleshooting. When you identify an out-of-line condition, what detailed reports help you to determine the cause? And 5. Compare, contrast the similarities and differences of leading DMS formats. The main presentation highlights the ADP reports, concluding then in the latter part of this discussion an analysis of a real dealership, and it is a real dealership that uses the Reynolds & Reynolds system, so we can see both systems in action. Now, utilization rate of DMS potential. And these data come from PricewaterhouseCoopers, De Rosier Trendsetter Survey, as it was called. It was done a number of years ago now, where they surveyed dealer principals to identify in which parts of your dealership do you use the respective DMS applications, and to what extent, if you decide to use it, do you actually use the full functionality of that particular application. And you can see here the parts department, accounting, and parts inventory catalog. They're really the power users of DMS capability. See, finance and insurance, that's a fairly complex business. 52% of dealers use the DMS there. Showroom traffic, often sales managers have their own little pet applications, or maybe not even software to use it. And service body shop, 54%. That's a lower application than service, simply because body shops, because often particularly if the dealership is using an insurance company's direct repair program, they often have to use their software. Leasing, word processing, obviously that's done by standalone desktops typically. Accounting, 77%. Internet access, 35%, etc., etc. Now, you can see there's significant regional differences. Atlantic, 57%. Quebec, 29% in finance insurance, and you can see here 38, 27, 49 in the prairies for leasing, and 45. So it's an interesting data collection, and it meant that 63, and this is where that 46% number came from, the 46%, 63.2% of dealers use the full range of DMS applications in all departments of the dealership. Where they do use it, they indicate they're only tapping into about 70.8% of the power of the system. And when you combine these two variables, they're really only using 46% of the total, as shown in the bottom right here. That's of total system functionality. It would appear then that we don't constantly need new bells and whistles and system updates, but that we should concentrate on helping dealers use the full system power. Okay, that's about utilization rate of DMS potential. Now I'll go to the actual reports, in which, as indicated, we'll start with the ADP monthly summary analysis. That's a 2-page report. I will give you first an overview of the ADP system's 2 reports, and then we'll get into some specific sections. What do they tell you? So here we have the first category of page 1 of the monthly summary analysis, inventory balance in a number of categories of parts. And I'll get to that in a moment, what they do tell you. And you can see number of parts, parts pieces, and parts cost. And for each of these categories, again, percentage. Parts with negative on hand, and that would be parts that are not in inventory but for which an invoice has been generated and paid, and that would typically be a prepaid special order. Then core exchange, then memos on file, and memos on file, that category would generally be used for when you bring up a parts number. There may be a memo saying this part has been superseded by part number so and so. That's the classic use of this memos on file. Then parts added in the respective category. Then parts and memos deleted for that. And this is the monthly summary, so that means for that particular month. Then inventory movement sales, and that's expressed in months no sales, so you can see what's heading for obsolescence, anything over 6 months old here, and we'll deal with that very specifically. Then inventory receipts in terms of categories, the months no sales categories. Then outstanding orders for stock orders, supplementary orders, customer orders, back orders, and back orders for stock, supplementary, and customer. And outstanding forced orders. And forced orders are orders that are not active parts typically used to calculate a stock order, that perhaps a manual order, a non-stock part where I say, I've got to have that, and I push it into the stock order. This is page 2 of the monthly summary analysis, and here we see gross sales. I'll make a specific point. This is the DMS. So gross sales, don't confuse them with gross sales on the financial statement. The DMS keeps everything at cost, so these are gross sales expressed at cost. ADP calls it that. Reynolds and Reynolds calls that category actually cost of sales, which is indeed what it is in financial statement terms. And there's a gross sales for regular sales, no history, drop ship, wholesale, no history. Drop ship, by the way, being, for example, often tire programs are drop ship, where the manufacturer has a tire program. You order from your manufacturer, but they go directly to the tire manufacturer that then ships directly to the dealer, but you will be invoiced by your own manufacturer that you hold the franchise from. Warranty, no history, and warranty, drop ship, etc. And lost sales, an important category to track. And then return sales and gross sales minus return sales ultimately translate into net sales. Receipts, stock orders, supplementary orders, customer orders, emergency purchases, and net adjustments, plus and minus adjustments. And factory returns, these are the normal return programs for orderly clean out of inventory. Net appreciation, positive, negative, these are usually dominated by negative adjustments. And that parts updated with cost, where there was a problem with a part with no cost on the inventory, this would have been updated during the months. And parts with comments. And parts with comments are different from memos on file, that they usually would say, when you bring up a part number, there's a related part to it. Use this part together with this other part, or use this part only on this respective model, not on another model. These would be classic parts with memos. If they're effectively used, they really support the sales effort and make sure that customers are not inconvenient for saying, oh, I needed the other part too when I bought this one. So, and then miscellaneous and sublet items, and parts not on file but sold. Okay, that's the monthly summary analysis. Now we get into the annual activity and benchmark trends report. Your textbook discusses each group of data on the monthly summary analysis and the annual activity and benchmark trends reports in full detail, starting with the KPI definitions, how it is applied, and where it's appropriate, some diagnostic recommendations. But in this recording, I'll limit myself to the major KPIs we have introduced in chapters 3 and 4. In other words, those critical to advanced inventory management. And the annual activity and benchmark trends report helps us with, obviously, trend analysis, as the title would indicate. This is a May 2013 statement, and that year-to-date total would then be 5 months year-to-date. And year-to-date average would be the average divided by 5, total divided by 5, and then the last 12 months total and the last 12 months average. Okay, so this lets you really look at intermediate term and for 12 months period. How am I tracking for number of parts, for parts pieces, for parts cost, parts with negative on hand, core and exchange, gross sales, net sales, lost sales, outstanding orders, total receipts for customer and emergency, net adjustments, net appreciation, and then some very important critical inventory management categories: non-stock parts, number of parts, parts pieces, parts cost, gross sales, net sales, lost sales, outstanding orders, and then inventory movement over the 12 months period. And these are indicative of what's heading for obsolescence. Then non-productive parts, in other words, they've been on the shelf and they really haven't moved in terms of the active parts criteria. So these are non-stock parts, excess stock less than 12 months. In other words, we have maybe done some bulk buying, etc. And stock greater than 11 months no sales, and this is months no sale, which means 12 months or greater, and that's clearly absolutely obsolete. And non-stock parts not sold, which is stuff sitting on the special order bin. New obsolescence, stock 9 months, and non-stock parts greater than 2 months in inventory. An early phase in, this would be non-stock parts where I'm actually getting enough hits to have a look at whether I want to phase this in as an active parts. Then true turns, and then purchase to stock ratio, which can identify stock order performance, sales closing ratio that we've identified, and the demand filled from stock ratio, as ADP calls it. And then non-stock parts sales efficiency, how do my non-stock parts turn over? So now let's get into the KPIs that are critical to advance inventory management. And let me start off with a general observation first on here are the essential inventory performance measures: excess stock and obsolescence, inventory true turn, that really deals with inventory movement. My inventory gross turns is more about working capital efficiency, stock order performance, and level of service. So a range of considerations and detailed reports will help refine our understanding of what is being analyzed. And so when we look at performance against recommended guidelines, months to date or month-end data, this is the strength of the monthly summary analysis report, because that looks at the current months or at some point during the current months. And then for performance trends, that is the annual activity and benchmark trends report that aids what we've called in financial analysis horizontal analysis, trend analysis. Okay, now let's move into some of the sections that are specifically important to advanced inventory management. The first one is inventory balance, and that comes from the monthly summary analysis. Inventory balance shows totals for all parts controlled by the system. The column on the left here shows parts by what are called special status codes, and I'll get to them in the next slide where I elaborate. So there's the total inventory balance, and you can see here it's first by the non-indented line is total inventory, and the indented rows are by those special status codes. And you can see here number of parts in number of part numbers in the system, the percent that represents for the special categories, special status codes categories, then pieces, the percent that represents, and then parts cost, and then the corresponding percent. So that's investment. That's the number of pieces. Clearly, many parts have multiple pieces, and that's particularly the case in terms of active parts. And then we have the categories. Okay, let me look at the categories then to define the special status codes. Active parts. And there, any part that's entered into the system where the special status code field is left blank automatically becomes an active part. So active parts are blank special status codes. Non-stock parts, they are parts that are on the system to be tracked, have the special status code of NS, and they get phased in or phased out at some point as we decide we have active parts, and both the number of parts and the dollar cost investment are important here. Automatic phase out parts, AP, special status code, they are in the standard, the default system settings, 6 months no sale, they go into that category until held inventory becomes 0, and then they kick into the delete status, which is the next category here, DEL. Okay. And manual order parts usually are things like fairly expensive assemblies and things like that, where I don't want the system to determine that should go on a stock order. These get kicked out as, do you really want to order that and have to release it? As a manual order part, it's the dealer assigned those codes. And the dealer phase out is a special category where I decide automatic phase out. I want to phase out that whole category because it is a part source that is used in a model that I no longer have customer retention on. I don't need that on the shelf. And special purchase parts with a special status of SP. What would be an example? Perhaps the manufacturer announces a recall campaign and there's a unique kit used to complete that recall campaign, but it's only usable for that campaign, and it's not something I want to normally have in inventory, so I just call it a special purchase part. Now, final comment here, parts with no cost. Clearly the number of parts should be near 0. I have been repeatedly told by parts veterans that the no-cost parts are almost always the result of a key entry error. Nobody gives you anything for nothing, so if there's no cost in the parts file, that means I've inputted something that probably is not in the master file, and therefore no cost shows up. So that deserves review by a special detail list, what is in those parts and what does that imply. Now, let's look at some of those diagnostic conditions that I've earlier alluded to. In the inventory composition, it shows, as indicated, the inventory as a whole, and then breaks it down for each special status code in the inventory files. So, what do we see here? Active or blank special status parts and non-stock parts should make up the bulk of the inventory. Why? Well, these are parts that are constantly moving in and out, and that means that really is the most important. Non-stock parts are special orders, and active parts have met minimum qualifying criteria and therefore are regularly moving parts. Number of non-stock parts should be high. We've said greater than 30%, but parts, pieces, and cost should be low. Why is that the case? Number of parts that are being tracked, they are on the system to be tracked, and 30, 40, 50% is wonderful, meaning that the parts department is truly using the non-stock parts feature to evaluate demand, and that's the way to do it. Any demand that I could not fill gets into the non-stock parts file. But parts, pieces, and cost should be low because that means inventory, non-stock parts in stock, and they are special orders that have not moved, and clearly that's an out-of-line condition that needs careful monitoring. In a standard settings, active parts move to automatic phase-out status at 6 months no sale. high probability of obsolescence. We've seen in a previous discussion in the context of chapter 4 that the probability that a part that has had no sales for 6 months is 65%, that it will also not have any sales in the remaining 6 months. So that's a high probability of heading for obsolescence. Monitor for orderly return to the supplier. The automatic phase-out category deserves regular printout of detailed reports, what's in there and which of these individual parts do I want to return to the manufacturer. So this is the core account that is essential for proper obsolescence monitoring. So that's inventory composition diagnosis. Now let's go to inventory movement, and the ADP reports it both in sales and receipts. And the sales part is essential for us. Both groupings report the movement range in months no sales, and it's typically abbreviated when you see it in MNS, months no sale. So let's first look at by our definition, any part in the greater than 6 months no sale range, any of these parts in those 6 months no sale ranges, and there's really 7 to 12, over 12, they are either technically to absolutely obsolete. Technically at 6 months no sale, 9 months no sale, obsolete. At 12 months no sale, absolutely obsolete. So clearly this category in sales, 7 to 12 months and over 12 months, which is obsolete. And they really do 7 to 12 months, less than 10% is a good guideline. That's clearly there. Over 12 months, less than 5%, because that's usually heavily influenced by seasonal parts, what may be over 12 months. So this dealership here that this report reports on is really doing a good job. New parts, no sales would be things like perhaps new model introductions and initial part shipment from the manufacturer. Often they have return privileges within 6 months of without restocking charges, but new parts no sales, they were brought in and there's no movement on those. Okay, so 7 to 12 clearly is either technically to absolutely obsolete, and over 12. Now we see here number of parts again, parts pieces and parts cost. When you determine the percentages of obsolescence, the parts cost, the inventory investment is what counts, not the pieces, not the number of parts numbers in the system. Why? Inventory management is about working capital management. So it's not number of parts or pieces, but cost or the investment that counts. Now, in terms of stock movement and obsolescence, what kind of details can we see there to interpret the sales and receipts reports? So let's start off with the first bullet. 0 to 3 months sales and receipts should be mostly active parts and represent a moderate to high degree of value. That's really my mostly fast-moving inventory. Percentages should be progressively lower in the 4 to 6, the 7 to 12, and over 12 months categories in both sales and receipts. For example, 6 months no sale as a good generic guide is less than 35%. Toyota, as we've indicated, less than 10%. And then 9 months no sale is deemed obsolete. Over 12 months no sale, it's termed absolutely obsolete. And 12 months no sale, a generic industry guideline, is less than 10%. Toyota today says less than 2%. New parts no sale, receipts, parts pieces, and cost should be 0. They never had sales or receipts, and that makes sense. So why do they there? They're usually there, as I've said, as sort of initial factory shipments or something that was brought in, hopefully not for speculative buying, but they both pieces and cost should be 0. And for all except seasonal parts, a 6 months no sale phase out standard should be applied. Seasonal parts, we've indicated, a season could be anything from 12 to 15 months long. So that's where you sometimes see over 12 months parts that might be winter tires or something like that because they are seasonal parts. Now, let's move to the next category in stock movement and obsolescence, and that's excess stock. We've defined excess stock as where on hand and on order quantity is greater than the current best stocking level. And the guide is less than 25% of total inventory. And this is because excess stock can occur randomly in the first category, and then I'll go to the second paragraph, because best stocking level is recalculated monthly. And that may mean, let's say I have a part that has a typical demand of 20 pieces per month, and all of a sudden this current month that the monthly summary analysis reports on, I only had demand for 5. Well, at month end, the inventory economic order quantity system would recalculate and saying, based on this new 5 pieces of demand, you have excess inventory. So that would be one example where excess stock can occur randomly. Now, excess stock is caused by changing demand patterns, obviously then, or intentional. And that may be when special discounted promotional items are purchased in bulk, and also by safety stock where I decide, well, this is a fairly random kind of fluctuation in this particular parts or part source demand, and I better up my safety stock from 30 to 45 days supply or something. And seasonality obviously too, because of season being 12 to 15 months, or can be 12 to 15 months. So that then means excess stock needs to be monitored. Is it simply a random inventory fluctuation? Is this caused by changing demand patterns, or is it because of my buying patterns? Now, obsolescence is the next bullet point here, less than 10%, the generic guide. And less than 10%, 2% for the Toyota just-in-time system, for example. It's simply a more permanent form of excess, and that, I guess, is obvious. All obsolescence is excess stock. If it doesn't move, I shouldn't have it. But, and we'll come back to that as we are proceeding with our discussion, all obsolescence is excess, but not all excess is obsolete because of that bulk buying that I may have done. This is clearly moving parts, but right now I have a 120 days supply, and really I should only have a best stocking level of 45 days supply, but I've had an extra 15% discount, so it made sense for me to buy it. Now, continuing with a stock movement and obsolescence discussion, what are some specific diagnostic checkpoints related to stock movement and obsolescence? First, too many parts in an inventory age category for a particular source. Well, one obvious thing is adjusting the day supply setup for that source. That's probably why it's accumulating. And too many parts in the 0 to 3 month sales or receipts category with a special status other than blank, and that may be manual orders or non-stock status or something like that, where I have to force the order basically to bring it through. And so consider manually phasing in these parts and not waiting until the minimum turn rate has been achieved, and that may be one analysis point. Run predefined reports to identify specific problem parts. And the first one would be excess stock less than 12 months old, and that, I guess, would be classically where those bulk purchases mentioned a moment ago would sit in excess stock less than 12 months old. Customer orders not picked up, and that the customer being both internal and external customer, because there may be service department special orders. Non-stock parts 2 months old, which apparently have been sitting on the shelf for 2 months, and non-stock parts not sold. They're 2 separate reports that I can produce. Now, earlier I said maybe I may bring some non-stock parts in the inventory, parts to consider for early phase-in. And one of the detailed reports is non-stock part yearly sales Here is YISL greater than 2. If my qualifying criteria is 3 demands in 3 separate months, well, if I've had that, and that's non-stock parts that I've had that on, it's probably time to phase that in. New or old obsolescence separate reports. Stock 9 months, no sale, that's obsolescence. More than 12 months old, that's absolute obsolescence, and that clearly needs to be analyzed in detail for either inventory adjustment, inventory write-off, or return if it's still possible, because the longer you wait with this kind of obsolescence, the more likely the probability that it may become non-returnable, that part. So that's stock movement and obsolescence. Now let's get into some of the other measures, gross turns and true turns. Gross turn is purely a financial statement measure. In other words, gross turns is about working capital efficiency. I want 4 turns at minimum, and that would be in a weekly stock order setting, or 12 turns at minimum in the just-of-time setting. So if I do X dollars worth of sales at cost of sales, my inventory investment to achieve that particular turn objective is X dollars. So it's purely about working capital efficiency. True turns measures inventory productivity or demand filled from stock. And I suggest make sure you can describe the difference between gross and true turns. That's a fundamental concept in inventory management. If you're looking at advanced inventory management, inventory effectiveness, true turns is the only meaningful measure for that. For overall working capital use, gross turns is the right measure. Now, what would we look at when we have issues there? Run the annual activity and benchmark trends report by source to identify slow-moving sources which might be lowering the average. Run a non-productive parts reports, and that would be excess stock within the current year, less than 12 months old, and that's the bulk purchasing that I referred to a couple of times. Stock months no sales greater than 11. Well, that's clearly 12 months or longer that they've been sitting on the shelf. They are absolutely obsolete. And non-stock parts not sold, which are those special order parts that are gathering dust on my special order bin, and run excess stock calculations for sources containing these parts. What's in there? What do I have to do to clean out that inventory? Review dealership procedures for ensuring customer special orders are picked up in a timely manner. Where practices in this area are too casual, you will usually see that overflowing special order bin syndrome that I mentioned a moment ago, and often the bulk of non-stock parts not sold are really service department special orders that for some reason have not been installed. Okay, then let's move on to receipts in the system monthly summary analysis report. Receipts, stock orders, supplementary orders, customer orders, emergency, that allows you to track performance, I should say order performance, stock order performance, and this is shown here in this case 59% for the months. That probably would be more meaningful in the annual activity and benchmark trends report, because that shows the overall performance. Typically that's stock order performance is done on an annualized basis, and it shows gross receipts posted for the month for all parts on the parts account, and then breaks them down by the type of receipt. And the transaction count, because this is now page 2 of the monthly report, and from section 9 onward it shows that transaction account, which is another measure of comparative balance in the parts flow, and we'll see that in some of the diagnostic checkpoints that I get to now. So purchasing practices checkpoint, outstanding orders in number of parts should be about equal to the active parts in the inventory balance, because these parts are constantly sold or ordered. These are regular movements. Now the next item, stock orders and daily and emergency orders. Stock orders high, daily and emergency orders low. This is typically an inverse relationship. And what do you see under this heading? Stock order percentage is low. Well, analyze daily and emergency order categories. Why are they emergency orders? Should these be parts that should be phased in? And have I not tracked these parts as non-stock parts, etc.? Okay. Second, back orders high. Analyze backorder patterns for cars. Are they back orders from the manufacturer? What's the reason? Are they back orders because of my order submission process, etc.? Third bullet, many force ordered parts with special status code of non-stock. Forced ordered parts are orders not on the DMS list of stock order parts, but they are currently needed. In other words, non-stock parts, for example, with yearly sales greater than 2 identified earlier, that would be classic, or a manual order part that should have been on the stock order. Review the phasing criteria for the sources, and should something be changed in the way I classify that by special status code. Many outstanding special orders. Identify parts with customer order and follow up with service advisor or customer. And that's what I had said earlier. Many of the special order parts that are sitting on the bin are typically service department special orders. Most of the customer special orders in today's setting, it's at least a significant down payment, if not full prepayment. So that isn't an issue to move those. Now, let me just interject something about order types, because we've talked a lot in the receipts about order types. This is one manufacturer's weekly stock order system, and I worked with this particular manufacturer in my former role as an independent consultant. There's order types, stock, daily, emergency orders. These are the 3 types. What are they used for? Order frequency, there's a scheduled weekly date. They're clearly for stock purchases. This is daily orders. They are for supplementary orders, typically used on normally active part, where because of some random parts of some sudden bulk order, I run low and I'm in danger of running out of inventory. That's for supplementary daily orders, and the emergency or VOR order for emergency orders only. An order confirmation was supplied, the order receipt confirmed. Their turnaround at the time was 48 hours. It'll leave our parts distribution center within 48 hours, not counting the day of the order submission. That's the special footnote here. And only stock orders received the 5% purchase discount or the 3% obsolescence accrual. Daily orders within 24 hours, and the emergency orders were expedited shipping. And when I worked with this manufacturer in the past, they applied a $30 surcharge to each emergency order to defray the cost of this expedited shipping. I checked recently. Apparently this charge has now been eliminated, and that's fairly common now, that there is no longer a shipping charge. That's a typical weekly stock order. The just-in-time order doesn't really need to be illustrated. That's just one order type, as long as in by a daily cutoff deadline, usually 4:30 in the afternoon at the ordering parts distribution center. I will get the parts in the morning. Now, we talked about stock order parameters, and the first key item here is stock order performance. Key guide in the WSO system, 80 to 80%, and it's an annualized number usually, as mentioned earlier, and in the just-in-time system, 85 to 90, because I can submit essentially daily stock orders. In the JIT setting, this measure, stock order performance, is typically called purchase efficiency, and the numerator here, called stock purchases, is usually called efficient purchases, and then divided by total purchases. We've reviewed this previously, so I won't dwell on it. Total purchases, just as we have already discussed in Chapter 3, to reinforce, is the total cost of sales plus, but perhaps minus, change in inventory. If there was a significant reduction in inventory as I'm managing my day supply down, and minus adjustments, P&A inventory, that's total purchases. Could be plus adjustments for individual entries, but inevitably the overall adjustment account is negative. Okay, now Let me move into stock purchasing essentials, and I'll again start talking with a WSO system and then make reference to the just-in-time setting, what differences you might see there. On average, each 2% improvement in stock order performance will generate at minimum a 1% increase in gross profit dollars. This is a directly observed result in the WSO setting. In the JIT setting, it depends on what benefits, quote unquote, are attached to efficient purchases, again, quote unquote, how powerful this effect will be. So this clearly depends on the system you are operating in. The overriding objective, and this observation certainly holds for both major order systems, the overriding objective is to maximize stock purchasing or efficient purchases while providing an appropriate level of service meeting customer expectations. And why is that? Certainly we all have some special purchases or some special orders. Why is that a problem to have too many special purchases? Well, there are two major problems. And this is where special ordering is less than optimal. The first one is that dealerships' inventory investment produces zero return, because the inventory that turned, quote unquote, came from someone else's stock. And second, that's the second major problem, when all incremental costs are factored in, that typical emergency purchase produces only between 1/3 to 1/2 the gross profit of a part ordered via stock order and on hand when requested. Why? Well, I'll show you in the following slide, if you're wondering on that, some of the items that need to be considered. An emergency purchase is any transaction where all or part of the profit has been spent in the acquisition. And this definition of emergency purchases equates directly to the reality observed in this particular item that produces only between 1/3 to 1/2 the gross profit. Now, why? And let me illustrate you an example of emergency purchase where, let's say, send our parts driver to another dealer or to whatever wholesaler to pick up a part because I need it now, the car is in. Okay, what is the incremental cost of this emergency purchases? Let's say serve urgent demand where I don't want to wait overnight. Well, if you're on a weekly stock order, foregone stock order, for discount first of all, and I'll illustrate it again with a weekly stock order. Foregone obsolescence accrual, I'm not buying that from the manufacturer, whether just in time or WSO, so there's no obsolescence accrual available. A premium paid to the outside source. If I go to another dealer, it's unlikely that dealer gives me the part at dealer net cost, so it may be cost plus a given percentage, or the list price less 15%, which might be the dealer's trade price, but certainly let's assume it's about 20% of the cost of the part. And because I've sent my parts driver there to the source, let's say it's 15 kilometers each way, so I have 30 kilometers at 50 cents per kilometer, the cost of running the vehicle, plus $10 an hour, and 15 kilometers back and forth, and getting the part delivered is probably at least $25 at $10 an hour for the combined cost. So what does that mean? The dealership is paying for the privilege to sell that particular part. Let's say that's a $50 part and everything foregone, and make basically no money on that. Now, we move to the annual activity and benchmark trend report. Note how it reports trend performance, and let me explain the column headers here. And this is this example we had used at the introduction to this chapter. It's a May report. So this reports the month of May and repeats certain figures from the monthly summary analysis report to facilitate viewing year-to-date and past 12 months figures at a glance, and we'll look at those that are relevant. So you see the sales, gross sales for the months of May, the year-to-date total, the year-to-date average, and if I look at that, months of May is significantly above the year-to-date average, so it's clearly a strong month. The last 12 months total, if we wanted to compare the year-to-date total to the last 12 months total, I could annualize that by dividing this 2,276,000 by 5, because the month of May multiplied by 12, and see if we are tracking on according to last year's 12 months performance. And last 12 months average, my year-to-date average is 455. My last year's 12 months average was 481, so I'm clearly behind, but May was quite strong, and it reflects a couple of the winter months where maybe lower volumes existed. So this is the horizontal analysis, the trend analysis, and how it helps. The gross sales, the net sales, the lost sales, the outstanding orders, total receipts for customers and emergencies, and then net adjustments, net appreciation. Net adjustments, as indicated, are usually negative, and net appreciation is in this case negative, so it's net depreciation, because there are two fields in there: net appreciation, net depreciation. Appreciation and depreciation, which then leads to net appreciation, so there was more depreciation in this. Now, I will therefore, because this repeats certain figures, I'll therefore not repeat the monthly summary checkpoints discussion, but cover only some of the report sections that further add to our understanding of how DMS data becomes useful information to support inventory management decisions. The first one I'll look at is lost sales and non-stock part numbers. First, some definitions and relevant observations, and we have previously discussed this in the context of chapter 4, but the definition of lost sales is demand for parts that was not filled through a regular sale, customer order, or emergency purchase. It must be tracked to predict demand and phase-in criteria accurately. These are lost sales. It becomes meaningless if lost sales are not shifted to non-stock parts status code to continue to keep track of this part number that we couldn't fill, and to determine are there enough hits on that part over a period of time to make them active parts. Next is non-stock parts. Again, parts tracked, as I just alluded to, in the system that are not ordered automatically and do not automatically or typically have stock on hand. They are in a system to test demand to determine if they should become regularly ordered items. Now, the particular report, non-stock part sales efficiency, that tells me the percentage of non-stock parts having receipts that have not been sold. In other words, that's non-stock parts in stock, and that would be an important detailed report to get and see what's in there, to maybe have a discussion with service managers, say which of these parts should I be returning because they've may have been sitting there for a month or two. Will you still be using those, or should I return them to the manufacturer in my regular monthly or quarterly return? So continuing with that, what should we expect to see in daily, month-to-date, or month-end monitoring in these particular categories? Let's say lost sales report interpretation. We start with lost sales, and the number of parts should be low, but not zero. Well, number of parts is clearly means, in terms of part numbers, if it's zero, it usually means they're not being tracked. There should be few lost sales, but certainly not be zero. The pieces and cost figures show the size of the lost sales opportunities. In other words, these are pieces that have not moved, and the dollar value attached to these pieces, this is the opportunity cost of not having been able to conclude that sale or complete that sale. The transaction count should be about the same as the number of parts, because that means that there is balance in that. If the transaction count is significantly greater, then some parts have multiple hits and that usually indicates there are some parts which have yearly sales greater than 2, and we probably should be looking at those for early phase-in. Most lost sales should be for non-stock parts. Maybe some lost sales are normally active parts where I've had some unusual demand and some wholesale account came and cleaned out my inventory, and in the same day somebody else comes and wants one of those parts, but that would not be normally a lost sale. Most lost sales should be for non-stock parts. Now, what do we see often if lost sales are too high? Well, look at early phase-in. That's one category for non-stock parts, or higher day supply for specific sources. I'm running out because of whatever fluctuating demand, and they should probably have higher safety stock level, which adds to my day supply, and that would be one solution. Lost sales are too low. Well, are they being recorded, particularly if they're close to zero? And also look at phase out criteria. And so we have said this usually is indicative of excess inventory and random parts if the lost sales are too high, and maybe they should be phased out because is there frozen working capital. And that's why we don't have many lost sales, because we have stuff sitting in there on the shelf that's years old. Okay, so that's clearly also a potential problem. That completes the discussion on lost sales and non-stock parts. Now to another major category, this level of service. And ADP reports that again for the months year-to-date, total year-to-date average, the last 12 months total, last 12 months average, by 3 categories: purchases to stock ratio, by number of parts, by pieces, by cost. And by cost, in dollars, because stock purchases divided by total purchases would be the stock order performance. So by cost, this would parallel the stock order performance that is also reported in the receipts row of the monthly summary analysis section. So stock order performance. Now the sales closing ratio, by number of parts, by piece, by cost, you can see they're almost identical. That is, as we have said, the sales closing ratio can be calculated by number of parts, pieces, and cost. Now, the demand filled from stock ratio, we said, must be calculated by piece. Here is why, because if I have 3 pieces in stock and it takes a set of 4 to finish that job, I really can't finish that repair involved, and so I could not fill demand from stock for the 4. So by piece for the demand filled from stock ratio. Now, remember the level of service formulas from the previous discussion in chapter 4. So let's look at them briefly and add some explanation to that, because here we are looking at DMS numbers. Previously we discussed them in the overall advanced inventory management setting. The sales closing ratio, and this is how ADP uses, it's net sales divided by net sales plus lost sales. Net sales is gross sales minus sales returns, as previously shown in that section of the report. Now, these are the labels ADP uses. But net sales, if they come from the DMS, they will be at cost. And that's important to recognize, and that's in the footnote here. The ADP reports use gross sales and sales returns label. The Reynolds and Reynolds reports actually calls these cost of sales. These represent the cost of sales, since the DMS keeps records at cost. This is a different price level when the gross sales come from the financial statement. They are at cost because generally accepted accounting principle requirement, the lower of cost or net realizable value. So remember that. The net sales and gross sales labels are not the same numbers as the financial statement, which are at the marked up price level. Should be approaching 100%, the sales closing ratio, because the difference between 100% and what you calculate is lost sales, and they should be small. Now, the next demand filled from stock ratio again uses net sales, emergency purchases and special orders, and lost sales you can only get from the DMS, so there will be at cost. That's why the net sales have to be reduced to cost of sales, even if you get them from financial statement. And so gross sales and sales returns need to be done at cost, but if you're getting them from the DMS and they're reported there, then this would be the level of service. Okay, so that's a quick reinforcement of what we previously discussed. Now let's look at some diagnostics, some level of service checkpoints. If the three ratios are too low, examine sources that should be phased in early. For example, non-stock parts with greater than 2 sales in the last 12 months. We've said a generic industry guideline out there is additions to inventory, 3 separate demands over a period of 12 months. So if my criteria is higher, maybe these I should bring in inventory. There is maybe a problem with inventory balance, and check the reports. And categories are there, particularly if I have a low gross turn ratio and I find that later, then maybe I have both low gross turns, meaning I have excess inventory investment, but if I have also a low true turns ratio, not only do I have too much inventory, but even much of what I have is largely obsolete, because that's why I'm getting low true turns too. Simply too many lost sales or emergency purchases, and that may well be the case, that there's some working capital limitations in the dealership and I just don't have enough inventory to serve the business, but that's a constraint I have to labor under for the time being. Check stocked part numbers with lost sales. In other words, these are those parts that are normally active parts where for some reason, because of their subject to random demands, I ran out and it resulted in a lost sales. So that usually means either higher safety stock or higher best stocking level or higher best reorder point, and that's days supply decisions. Look at minimum, maximum, or the high or low inventory. The high inventory being best stocking level, the low inventory being best reorder point criteria, or maybe cost breaks, that for many of the smaller inventory items, the cost break EOQ quantity that we talked about in the context of chapter 4, maybe that needs to be applied. Now, I made mention earlier that a low demand filled from stock ratio combined with inventory true turns in excess of 5 times a year may indicate the dealership is not adequately responding to customer needs. And this is in the weekly stock order setting, of course, that 5 times is probably closer to 12 true turns in the just-in-time setting. So clearly this is something that needs careful watching. So this is some time-honored wisdom with respect to the likely inventory conditions that can lead to a low demand filled from stock ratio. Now, I had previously said that inventory management is a tremendously numbers-intensive business. Let me put a couple of exclamation marks behind this statement as we look at the next 5 slides, which deal with some of the management system detailed reports that are available. And I'll recap the monthly summary analysis reports key categories, because each of these monthly summary analysis reports will have many pages of detailed, or at least sometimes most of them will have many pages of detailed reports, which let you then focus on causes of specific conditions. And the first 9 pages on page 1 of the monthly summary analysis: inventory balance, parts with negative on hand, core exchange, memos and file, parts added, parts and memos deleted, etc. Each of those I can print out a detailed report when I'm wondering, why is this unusual or different from normal routine or trend patterns? And I guess that's where the headaches come from, with an in-basket full of a bewildering number of reports here. For the page 2 of the monthly summary analysis: lost sales, return sales, receipts, net adjustments, factory returns, net appreciation, parts updated with costs, parts with comments, etc., etc. Each of these have given detailed reports. On the annual activity and benchmark reports, inventory totals, sales, orders, receipts and adjustments, non-stock parts, inventory movement, sales, non-productive parts, new obsolescence, early phase and true turn, sales and receipts ratios, non-stock part sales efficiencies. Each of these have again many pages of detailed reports. And now comes, I guess, the coup de grace, let me call it that, plus a host of detailed reports on most of the listed reports. And this is just a list, and I'll name some of them to make the point. These certainly support inventory condition diagnosis, and it would be parts deleted reports. That's the month-end report, the automatic phase-out account part numbers that where the inventory quantity is now zero, so they're deleted. What was deleted? Parts to be deleted next month's report. Invalid parts reports, and that's where maybe I would print out if I have too many parts with no cost. Are there some invalid parts entered? Active and non-stock parts changed to automatic phase out, memos deleted, invalid memos deleted, etc., etc. Here, excess stock less than 12 months, lost sales emergency, non-stock parts 2 months old, non-stock parts not sold, non-stock parts with yearly sales greater than 2, and it goes on and on. Just don't need to regurgitate each of them because these are listed also in your text material. And these special reports, the earlier ones were system detail reports, these are special parts reports, and these are supporting rigorous parts business administration, not necessarily inventory management. Detailed parts list, report comments, locator parts, report by bin, report customer orders, report part change, report review, report special part status, etc. Daily invoice report, etc. So report by employee sales, report customers list, etc. So this are clearly supporting rigorous parts business administration. Hope this gives you a flavor of information they provide. I guess I made my point about inventory management being a tremendously number-intensive business. Okay, now system tools to pinpoint causes. It is generally useful to develop a list of inventory conditions that fall outside observed norms and link them to some thought starters or system tools, as we are calling them here, to pinpoint causes. And here is such a list of troubleshooting tips. And a troubleshooting tips list is contained in the last 5 pages of chapter 5. And each of these 12 items, and I'll just highlight some of them, identifies some major trouble conditions and then lists a broad range of bullet points on what to look at when you see them. Make use of it when you are doing parts operations management analysis, when you're doing your project. Certainly these are useful thought starters. Let's look at some of them. Inventory balance, lower and higher than normal. Well, what would you look at? System on hand count, higher, lower than actual bin count. That's an asset management problem. Stock order, larger, smaller than normal. Emergency purchases, higher than normal. Lost sales, higher than normal. Non-stock items, less than 5% of total inventory. Maybe higher, that also would be a report. Higher dollar value of non-stock parts, appreciation total higher or lower than normal, back order higher, lower, outstanding orders, pricing not correct, sales history higher and lower. So these are specific conditions that clearly warrant investigation and provide some hints on what would you look at when you see them. Okay, we've covered a lot of things, so now for a change of pace, let me get to this, to the Reynolds & Reynolds system, and it is a case study. This is a real dealership we'll call ABSC Motors, Automotive Business School of Canada Motors. And I had said at the start of this chapter that the ADP and Reynolds & Reynolds systems are quite similar. We'll see that with this case study, which, as indicated here, uses a real dealership's Reynolds & Reynolds reports, and this dealership, by the way, uses a just-in-time order system. So what kind of reports? The Reynolds & Reynolds monthly analysis, monthly summary analysis. I'm sorry, ADP calls it monthly summary analysis, and Reynolds and Reynolds calls it monthly analysis summary. That's where I often get confused. So ADP monthly summary analysis, and Reynolds and Reynolds monthly analysis summary. So I would expect that those of you in marketing wouldn't call this profound competitive differentiation. Let's look at page 1. This is a 3-page report, the monthly analysis summary of Reynolds and Reynolds, and it reports what earlier ADP called sales, gross sales. Reynolds and Reynolds calls it the cost of sales. That's indeed what it is. It comes from the DMS and therefore is at cost. Normal stock parts, automatic phase-out parts, dealer phase-out. So the categories are virtually the same. Manual order, non-stock parts, no phase-out parts. That's a different category from what, and also replaced by hold parts, and then obsolete parts and sold, not stocked. Lost sales, that's a memo item. Credit returns, a memo item. Unusual sales, whatever the dealership decides to put in there. And then investments as a core category. Normal stock parts, automatic phase out, dealer phase out, manual order, etc. Again by the same inventory categories. And then for total investment, 128,713, we'll get to that. And then dirty core inventory and new core inventory, whatever the dealership inputs there. Okay, and I'll make a specific point note. ADP calls this sales or net sales and gross sales. Reynolds and Reynolds calls it what it is. It is the cost of sales in financial statement terms. And finally here, activity is current, again reported in months no sales as in ADP. Current months, 1 to 3 months, 4 to 6 months, and then 7 to 9, 10 to 12, 13 to 24, 25 months or more. Okay. The highlighted section here, and I'll get to that when we look at this case study and what potential diagnostics are, identify out-of-line conditions, and we'll discuss them in detail to wrap up this topic. Let's go to page 2 of the ABSC Motors monthly analysis summary, and that is here in the orders and receipts. Outstanding orders by order category, stock, supplemental, customer, emergency, etc., and then processed orders for the same categories, and then receipts for the same categories. That's page 2. The highlighted section, particularly here on stock orders, is an issue in this dealership, and we'll get to that. And then page 3 is adds, deletes, and adjusts, added parts, deleted parts, minus adjustments, plus adjustments, physical inventory, return parts, and this is profoundly a problem here at this dealership that we'll see in a moment. Then appreciation and first pricing, appreciation factory master update, where a parts price change, a parts price increase was simply inputted in the system, and that may or may not be ideal, and I'll get to that in fact in the next chapter. And total appreciation, first pricing factory master update, first pricing manual update, etc. Then opening and closing inventory and percent of change, and that's an important inventory change number. And then miscellaneous, out of stock, no cost, factory order, no service, minus on hand, phased in, converted to automatic phase out, and we've discussed these headings in the ADP context, so I'll pass over them. And business ratios, level of service, stock order performance, gross inventory turnover rate, and true turnover rate, and get to them as we get to the individual analysis. So let's start with the cost of sales category. And the highlighted section here identify a couple of key issues that would, to me, raise some flags. 38.2% of year-to-date total, and that would be the 610,002 divided by total cost of sales of 1,597,000, were generated by non-stock parts. So 38.2% are special orders of sales. An additional 6.4%, and that is the 102,896 divided by the 1,597,000 were generated through pre-sold special orders, sold not stocked. In the months the number was lower in both cases, but for year to date that's the pattern. So a combined 44.6% of sales are produced through special orders. Now, while this may not be unusual in the just-in-time setting where overnight delivery is quote guaranteed, it certainly has the potential to affect customer convenience if a service vehicle has to be held overnight waiting for special order parts to arrive, and that's what typically happens, even if it's delivered overnight. If a car is in now and I don't have the parts in stock, yes, I can install it tomorrow, but the customer needs to come back. So it may be a problem. Next is the investments category, and you first see automatic phase out category, and this is in inventory values. That's important here because, as I mentioned in the ADP context, inventory management is about working capital management, not about pieces but the dollars invested, and are my inventory management practices freezing working capital. So 42.4% here is in the automatic phase out category, which in the standard setting means 6 months no sale. These parts are technically obsolete. 51.2% of parts numbers are in the NS category, and that's part numbers, and this is good. The dealer uses the non-stock system effectively to track demand. In other words, we've said a good guideline is 30% plus. So clearly this dealer does use the NS part system. But 21% of inventory value is in non-stock parts. This is non-stock parts in stock. This is not good. So these are special order parts gathering dust on the shelf. There clearly is a problem in that dealership with special orders not being properly cleaned out. Now, non-stock parts performance, usually the two categories are keys in automatic phase out here. And good industry generic guideline is less than 35%. Toyota says less than 10%, and it's just in time system. So clearly this is an issue. And non-stock parts in stock less than 5% and greater than 30%. So clearly there's some good news and some bad news here. Now, continuing with activity to identify potential obsolescence. This section reports inventory by months no sale. 28.8% of inventory value, extended value here, is therefore from technically to absolutely obsolete. It's technically obsolete after 6 months, that's 5.9%. From 10 to 12 months, it's obsolete. 13 to 24 and 25 or over, that's absolutely obsolete. So the combined number is 28.8%. That is a problem. Certainly 17.2% of inventory value, 14.3 plus 2.9, has had no movement in more than 12 months. And we'll come back to that when we get to item 9. This is item 4, where I show you an extended value report, which will explain why. And that's typically what should happen. When you see this pattern, my first reaction would be, well, print me a detailed report. What's in the 13 to 24 and 25 or more category? What's in there? Should that be there? Is there some explanation for that? Finally, gross inventory turns, and this comes from the previous numbers, that the total cost of sales divided by the total inventory investment, so 1,597,003 divided by the 128,730 of total inventory investment, that's 12.4, which may mean inventory is underinvested, and that's the reason for the high proportion of special order parts. I'm saying it may mean because this is a just-in-time order system dealer, and 12 turns, it can be as high as 12 turns, so 8 to 12 is a good generic guideline. So this dealership's parts department is run by a generally quite professional parts manager who unfortunately has a hard time to shake the attitude, and put it in quotes, it doesn't matter what I call the order, the parts will be here in the morning. Well, Yes, well, this is indeed true in terms of parts lead time. It very much matters if I want accurate and meaningful management reports. We'll see that in a moment and keep that in mind. It does matter. And in a just-in-time order setting where you just submit orders, there's no specific classification. What has to happen then if you want to classify it? Was this a special order, a supplementary order, a normally active part? Was this an emergency order? Or was it a stock purchase to replace normally active parts on the shelf? Well, you'd have to classify them when you receive the orders and input it. What is this? What order type? And that's sometimes in many settings that this parts manager that I just referred to just calls it busy work, and I had a hard time convincing him that no, it's not busy work. If you want meaningful reports, it's necessary to do that. Now we get to receipts. In terms of stock orders, if I divide 739,028 by total receipts, that gives me 43.7% of receipts are stock orders. In the just-in-time setting, these are typically considered efficient purchases. The guideline is between 80 to 90%. So clearly the 43.7 implies something that either not classified, it's probably the case that other orders that are customer orders or emergency purchases or supplemental orders are really just also replacing parts in stock, but they're not classified as such. A good part of the problem appears to be then the order type classification. This is reinforced in the business ratio sections that we get to in a moment. And here too, supplemental order is basically over 50%, 783,536 plus the other back orders divided by 1/7. That's almost over 50%. So that clearly is a problem here, and whatever the other orders are that are not classified here in 102781. There's a problem with classification. Okay. The business ratios that we get to in a couple of slides, stock order performance shows 18.7%, and this is probably something lost here somewhere. It shouldn't be. It should be higher than 18%, but something is not being picked up or inputted properly, which gets me to adds, deletes, and adjust category. There are combination of minus adjustments, and this is really just breathtaking, frankly. The combination of minus adjustments, in other words, inventory write-offs and return parts, is tantamount to a major inventory cleanout. Minus adjustments, $66,000, almost $67,000 were written out of inventory. And the return parts, another 128,000 over that 12 months period. I mean, 128,000 is the total inventory investment they have in a moment. So this is a major clean out and a major reduction in inventory. Now, the plus adjustments and the positive negative adjustment balance may either be a parts overage, because it's significant, 40,000. It's unlikely that is an overage, or from accounting parts price increases as an inventory value adjustment. And this would be LIFO costing, and I'll get to that in some detail in Chapter 6. This is no longer generally accepted accounting principles. In other words, the manufacturer had some price increases. The master price tape or the file is being sent to Reynolds and Reynolds, so they update the master file prices, and unless I have the right adjustments, it would just update all prices for that group of increased parts, which is last in is my current price, and that's no longer generally accepted accounting principle. So bear with me until we get to that in the next chapter. In other words, this section should raise a lot of red flags. When I first saw that, I kind of said, wow, what's going on here? This is breathtaking, as I said earlier. It speaks for itself. When you let obsolete and redundant parts pile up, which clearly was the case here, this is usually the end result. Now let me get to those business ratios that I alluded to a couple of times. And first, clearly considering the foregoing discussion, the 99.1% level of service cannot be the demand filled from stock ratio, but the sales closing ratio. They had a marginal, like a $14,000 or $12,000, if I remember from the earlier section we looked at, of lost sales, and that's the difference between 100% and the calculated sales closing ratio is the lost sales. So this is clearly, and that's the default ratio in Reynolds and Reynolds system. So it's the sales closing ratio. I wouldn't call that the level of service. Now, this is where the casual attitude about the order type classification at this dealership comes home to roost. The formulas for both stock order performance and true turnover rate use stock purchases, or in the just-in-time setting, efficient purchases in the numerator. If you fail to properly classify the order type, this is what I said earlier, because the parts manager says, because it doesn't matter what I call the order, the part will be here in the morning. That's common in a JIT system, or hopefully not too common. 3 out of these 4 business ratios become meaningless, because calculating by the actual order receipts, that was about 43% stock orders, and however that was picked up. The gross turnover rate is indeed the cost of sales over the inventory investment. That means fairly tight inventory at this point after all the write-offs. The true turnover rate is 5.8. However, it picked up the numerator in true turn calculation. It certainly would mean I have a very tight inventory to have 12 gross turnovers, and if this is really true, the true turnover rate, then much of what I have isn't moving, because I don't have a high true turnover. Okay, so there's a lot again at stake. In other words, it does matter that you classify order receipts properly by type if you want meaningful management reports. Finally, that brings me to the last point, and that was that extended value report that sheds light on the previously identified obsolescence. When we had what's in there in over 7 months, no sales, where I indicated my first reaction would be, can you print me a detailed report on what's in there? And this is a summary report, and from each of these source lines, source codes, you can get a detailed report that shows every part in the source. But I was more interested in the categories. And you can see slower moving parts is not necessarily a big problem, $8,700. Special orders, $77,750. That's about 2/3 of the total inventory investment, special order parts that went through there. They end up sitting on the shelf. Typically, the bulk of these is service department special orders. And here's, as I've indicated earlier, what I would do. I print out a detailed report on that and then sit down with the service manager and say, which of these parts do you still expect to install? And, the rest of them I'll return to clean this out. And then tires, $20,497. The other major category is tires. These are seasonal items. Season can be, as we've identified, 12 to 15 months long. This may or may not be a problem. So that then brings me to the end of a broad review of DMS reports and how to use them in diagnosing out-of-line conditions. So this has been a busy topic. In the next chapter, Chapter 6, we look at how to use those regular produced data points in ongoing parts performance monitoring. It's not quite as lengthy as this, but really you need to understand the systems in order to effectively manage inventory. So thank you, and for more in Chapter 6.